Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Asheville Vedic Astrology YouTube channel, youtube.com/Ryan's Vedic Astrology. And today I'm able to present to you a really wonderful video done by Fiona Marks, one of the graduating students from the Asheville Vedic Astrology Apprenticeship Program. This is her final project. She had to complete three 10,000-word papers, do a number of various sessions, and also complete three one-hour presentations, which have been turned into videos for this YouTube channel. This is the final one. In this video, Fiona touches upon the Avashtas, or the planetary states. The Avashtas, they help us to understand how the planets interact with each other, how they support or hurt each other, how their friends and enemies give their fruits within the chart. And she focuses on Lajjita Avashta here, which is an ashamed Avashta. And this Avashta is usually one of the most sensitive combinations that any individual can have within their chart. She'll go into determining how you know if you have this Avashta, what the Avashta means, the various combinations of different planets with the Avashta. And she ties this in with some very good example charts as well. So rather than take up any more of your time, here's Fiona Marks. And if you want to work with Fiona, she is now an official approved Asheville Vedic Astrologer. You can go to ashevillevedicastrology.com and go to the Vedic Astrologers tab, that section. And you'll see her website information, a bio, her photo, and ways to get in contact with her. So I hope you enjoy this video. I think it's extremely informative and educational, and you'll probably learn a lot about yourself and others. So enjoy and take care.
Hi everyone, it's Fiona Marks here with my final video for Ryan's Asheville Vedic Astrology Apprenticeship course, and I wanted to thank Ryan for his introductions to my video, and more especially for all of his dedication. And in Portuguese, we have this great word, exigente, his demanding nature in training us all as astrology apprentices. I'm so proud to present this final video for you. It's about Lajjitaadi Avashtas and the shamed Avashta. And we're going to be looking at how to unpack the complexity of that experience that people are having. So this video is for you if you either have a Lajjita Avashta in your chart, or you have clients with that constellation and you want to help them actually diffuse the time bomb that it is and find a way to work powerfully with that combination. So I hope you enjoy my video. I wanted to take that chance to speak with you personally, because when I'm on the video, you never see my face. I also wanted to thank you all of those of you who've come for readings with me from this channel, and I hope you will subscribe and follow me on my channel at fionamarks.com or on YouTube at fionamarks.com. Okay, enjoy the video. I'll see you at the end.
The 7 Faces of Shame, bringing light to darkness through the advanced application of Lajjitaadi Avashtas. I wanted to start my presentation today by sharing with you where this really came from for me, which is that when I think about shame, it's one of those difficult experiences in a person's life that is hard to process, and we end up kind of putting it in trying to lock it away in a chest, because going over it and over it just kind of re-traumatizes it. It doesn't seem that you can process this feeling of shame. So actually, as a child, if you have this experience, you just kind of want to lock it away. But even when you do that, it seems that it can be accessed and memory gets triggered, or somebody says something, you think that thought, and you feel those shame feelings again. So then you want to kind of bury it like in the top of an attic, dark, covered in lots of stuff, try to hide it altogether, forget about it. But still, even though you've done this, the shame can still be triggered by events or by people talking about things. So then you want to lock the door to the attic and hide it away altogether. but no matter what you do, it keeps responding to that trigger and giving you that sensation of shame. And so what can happen over time is one has the feeling of shame, but can't even remember what it was, what incident it was. It's because we've tried to bury it so much, it becomes hidden. And this is why I was really inspired when I learned about Lajjitaadi Avashtas and how they help us to define shame and to delineate different experiences of shame. And I think that this is a key that can help us reclaim and unlock some of these trunks that are hidden in the attic. So this is the inspiration for the video. Let's get started. Today I want to begin by sharing with you about what is shame, and then I want to also review how the shame Lajjitaadi Avashta is created. Then we're going to look at these 7 unique versions of shame as a way to empower ourselves and our clients to reclaim their hidden and forgotten feelings that they're afraid of. So I think it's really powerful. Then we're going to have a look at using shame Avashta, which, you know, we talk about the Lajjitaadi Avashtas as being inner psychological experiences, but I wanted to put in a few examples to show how external the shame Avashta can also be. And I want to wrap up by looking at what are the benefits of the shame Avashta. Can we turn this constellation on its head and actually see how transformative this can be in a person's life, how empowering and powerful. So what is shame? I really like this definition from Wikipedia. Shame is an unpleasant, self-conscious emotion typically associated with a negative evaluation of the self, withdrawal motivations, and feelings of distress, exposure, mistrust, powerlessness, and worthlessness. So I think that gives a good overall encompassing definition, and why I wanted it here in the presentation was because of that second, or that middle dot point, withdrawal motivations. I think this is what is so violent and destructive about shame, is that it actually causes the person to withdraw their connection to flow, to energy, to others, to the goodness of life. That unpleasant feeling, as it's described here, is so powerful that the person wants to keep themselves away from others because they're so reject worthy. And I think this is why when I put together for the previous video the Lajjitaadi Avashta's periodic table, I was wondering which of these Lajjitaadi Avashtas was the most violent, and when you looked at how each of them is created, it seemed natural that the shame Lajjitaadi Avashta was the most violent or destructive. And it just goes to show that the violence one does to oneself is perhaps karmically the most violent, the most difficult, the most damaging. Because even when we're looking at those other Lajjitaadi Avashtas, we think of starvation and especially agitation, where the person can be so frustrated, so restrained and constrained, and that they hit out at others. But perhaps at least that projecting out onto others is actually interacting with flow, it's interacting with life, it's keeping that flow open. Whereas shame, the violence is taking place inside and in withdrawing oneself from the goodness of life, from the potential of being a connected member of the community. So shame is a very powerful human experience, very lonely human experience. I also thought when we talk about shame, it's great to go back to the mythologies that we're all shaped by. And for those of us in that Western European tradition, we have the Christian story of Genesis. And in this story, actually, there's a very powerful mention of shame, where having completed creation, in 6 days, having created the earth and all of the plants and animals and the humans, these companions for each other, there's this ending of that cycle of all of the work of creation, with this quote, "And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed." And this is really powerful, because right there in that statement could be any other description. You know, the man and his wife were both naked and happy, and confident and excited about exploring the world, or pleased with the creation, or you can imagine so many endings to that sentence. And yet the word that's been chosen is "we're not ashamed." And the story goes on to have an incident that creates shame, and these beings then hide from God, which comes back to that dot point about the withdrawal motivations. But it also shows that in this mythology of Genesis, complete creation, the moment of completion where everything was exactly as it was planned, the earth, the plants, the animals, the people, the state of those people was that they were not ashamed. And I think that's really powerful, that it's something profoundly healthy to be without shame. And yet it's such a common human experience, and it causes us to withdraw from goodness. Now, we can't talk about shame without also mentioning Brené Brown, who has a very famous TED Talk about shame that I highly recommend. And I didn't know much about her until I did my first videos with Ryan a year or so ago, when we talked about the Libra Ascendant and the Scorpio Ascendant. And of course, as soon as I'd done them, before I'd seen them, before they were published, I just went through all those moments of shame, like how could I have done that, and how could I have exposed myself to that? Very critical of what I might have said or not said, or pronounced the wrong way, all of those thoughts. And who do I turn to but Brené Brown, who shares a video of exactly the same thing. How does one deal with shame, and how one can be competent or intelligent or an expert or anything in that, have some authority, and yet this feeling of shame is completely disempowering. Anyway, she has this famous quote that shame needs 3 things to grow. It needs secrecy, silence, and judgment. Shame cannot grow or thrive in the context of empathy. And I think this is important because of that diagram that we were looking at the beginning there, that we shame, and we naturally hide our shame, and that creates that secrecy. And I think astrology has a lot to offer in bringing light to the darkness of this secrecy, to unpacking it, laying it out objectively, giving it the person space to see the different energies that are creating that dynamic, and that this can release someone from their shame. I also love this quote because of empathy being highlighted as the antidote to shame. And I want to look through this whole presentation, and as we wrap up, come back to the importance of empathy. And the final thing that I wanted to say about, not quite the final thing, but one of the last things I wanted to say was that the interesting thing about shame is that one can feel shame without actually having taken any actions or having done anything shameful. One can have the thought about something that one decides is shameful, and that is enough to feel the shame inside oneself and to withdraw accordingly, to hide a part of the self away from others because I've had this thought that's so shameful. So I think that's a very interesting facet of shame, that it doesn't actually involve an action necessarily. Whereas, for example, guilt is feeling guilty about an action or shameful about an action. It's something that a person has done, that they look at that action and they regret it, or they feel guilty about doing it. But it's something that was actually done, and it's something external, it's something that happened outside of the self. Whereas shame is not something I've done, it's something wrong with me. You know, it's even, this is the violence of shame, that it's not about an action, a one-time thing. It is about my innate beingness. There is something wrong with that. So that's the difference between shame and guilt. And then shame can also feel similar to embarrassment, but with embarrassment we need an audience to have witnessed it, whereas with shame we don't need anything. It's just our own judgments of ourselves can be enough to cause that shame experience. But another interesting thing about shame is that a person can feel shame when another person has violated that person. So actually it's the other person who's done something wrong, but the person violated feels the shame. So they haven't actually done any action that was inappropriate. They haven't had any thoughts that were inappropriate, but this disrespectful violation of the person causes them to feel shame. And I think that is a fascinating aspect of shame, that the action may not belong to the person. They may have just been exposed to something that was wrong or violating or shameful, and they take on board this sense of shame. They withdraw from other people and they feel that there's something innately wrong with themselves. And then this is the final one that I wanted to share, which is that shame is somatic. And that goes back to the diagram again at the beginning, that we feel shame viscerally in the body. You know, people can flush red when they have their shameful reflections on their thoughts, or thoughts on their reflections on their shameful thoughts. It's a powerful chemical, somatic, visceral experience in the body when a person feels shame. It's not logical and it's extremely fast. So this is also why I think astrology is helpful, because it brings us the distance and the objectivity to notice, bring into our awareness the main players of this shame Avashta that are causing that somatic response. And therefore we can begin to, with practice, get more and more time in between the thought and the reaction, giving us the space to change our reaction. So extremely important that shame is somatic. Let's review the shamed Lajjitaadi Avashta. So this comes from that second video that I did for the apprenticeship program, where I examined all the Lajjitaadi Avashtas. But in this one, here you see the whole decision tree for Lajjitaadi Avashtas. Starting on the right, we talk about how to make a proud Avashta, then how to make a delighted Avashta, how to make thirsted and starved, and how to make agitated. For Lajjitaadi Avashta around shame, we need these factors. We need the planet, a planet that we are looking at, to be with, that is in the same sign as the Sun, Mars or Saturn. And then it either has to be in the 5th house or with a node, with Rahu or Ketu. So when we examine just the shamed Lajjitaadi Avashta, the essential items are, it has to be with a pure malefic. Sun, Mars, Saturn. Not the moon, the waning moon, not Mercury when it's with the malefic. Has to be with these main pure malefics. And for me, that speaks about kashta. It has to have that malefic planets. They give out their aggression, they give out their dissatisfaction and their unhappiness in kashta, and this, I think, is what is so violent to the planet in question. And then the 5th house or a node is required, and that's because the 5th house is when we take our whole life, that we've lived till that point. If you think of the houses as narrating a hero's journey, which was the first video that I did for Ryan's apprenticeship program. You've got the first house where you arrive with your given life path, the second house where you gather resources, the third house where you explore your world, you gain courage and you begin to know what you can do with your skills, with your hands. And then the fourth house is you build yourself a home, a safe place in this chaotic world that you've arrived in, where you've managed to gather resources and gain courage and skills, and you've explored. Now you can build yourself a base. That's the fourth house. It's somewhere safe where you can retreat to. And from there, you now know yourself well enough to take this journey where you want to take it. The fifth house, creating a legacy, creativity in general, children. These things are things we do on our own. This is our direction of our life. So of course shame is indicated here because there's nowhere else to hide. And with a node, what they add, so they can create a shame Avasta in any house, and that is because the nodes are like Alice through the looking glass. You know, they just managed to twist reality and throw that unexpected spanner in the works. So they create illusion and delusion. They create impenetrable, unknown, and yet fascinating experiences that we want to have but that we can't understand. So the perfect ingredients for shame. So what are these 7 faces of shame? I think this is so important that astrology can help us take this big, locked in the attic, scary boogie monster, under the bed maybe is just as good an example, that we just know that we're afraid of, that we're disempowered by, because we cannot have any dominion over this shame. Every time it gets triggered, boom, we're right there in that vulnerable space, and we want to withdraw from all the flow and goodness and potential, all the community, the connection, the love. We just have to cut off from that because this feeling is so unpleasant, self-conscious, and we just know that we're wrong, we're flawed, and we need to withdraw. So once we've established that pattern of being disempowered and no longer really knowing what was the cause of our shame, here is astrology helping us to reclaim our whole self, our emotional self, and to reconnect us with life. And it can do this by defining the shame experience into unique differences that help us grab a hold of our hidden feelings. So when it's the sun, our shame is going to be about inspiration. Our inspiration, either we're not inspiring enough as we should be, or we've inspired something that was shameful or that's gone wrong. And I'm going to have examples for each of these. So is your shame or your client's shame around inspiration? When it's the moon, the person is going to feel shame around their emotions or having needs. With Mars, the person will feel shame around their actions or their inability to take action at the right time. Perhaps someone who didn't do something feels that shame forever and disconnects from others because of that. Mercury is so interconnected with everything. It's hard to come up with one word to describe the shame when Mercury is involved. But Mercury likes to facilitate things, to make things easy through communication, through networking, through our peers and our friends. It wants to make the world better. And it does that by managing all of these complex tasks, putting them in the right order, getting things done, making the world better. If it has not been able to manage, or if it managed badly or managed the wrong things well, or if it cannot be objective as Mercury is supposed to be in its exploration of the world and truth, then Mercury is going to feel shame. And we will look at examples for all of these. Jupiter is our hope, but also the goodness, understanding the goodness in life, believing in the goodness in life. And when someone is shamed and Jupiter is involved, they will feel that they are not good enough, that there is something not good about them, or that they haven't been able to bring goodness to the world. They haven't made the world good. Venus is perhaps an easier one for us to get our heads around, because it is the shame of having desires, of wanting things and pleasures. So maybe that's our more traditional things that people feel ashamed about. And Saturn is the shame of flaws, of knowing how flawed a person is, knowing how flawed the self is, and being ashamed of that and therefore withdrawing. So these 7 pieces of the puzzle give us a different flavor of each planet when it's shamed, and can help a client be grounded in their experience, give them the markers to hold on to when that wave of somatic shame comes, to begin to apply some insight, some clarity, some logic to this overwhelming experience. Let's examine each one individually now. So the Sun, we already spoke about that this is going to be related to inspiration. For example, if they follow their inspiration, they will feel shame. What a dynamic, a tension inside the person to be so drawn to an inspiration but to feel shame about it. Shame from not meeting ideals, shame from lacking the self-esteem to enjoy success. And their own inspiration can never be enough. So can you relate to this in your client's chart or in your own chart? Let's have a look at a specific chart to help really anchor this type of shame. So for this one, I've picked John Lennon, who has a shamed Avashta happening right there in Libra. He's got the Sun, Rahu and Mars. So although it is not the 5th house, it's his 7th house, it is a shamed Avashta because we have the node with a pure malefic. Now, we could talk about people, their whole life for much more than the whole video. So I'm going to try and pull out some key themes for each of these lives we're going to look at. One of the things that I noticed as soon as I started researching this was that apparently the first song he ever learned to play on the guitar was Ain't It a Shame. So he's got 2 shamed Avashtas here, I thought it was interesting that he was drawn to that. But then I've got a quote here from an article where he says that he was a hitter. I couldn't express myself and I hit. I fought men and I hit women. This violent history was why he worked to transform himself into someone who embraced peace. This is why I'm always on about peace, he said. It's the most violent people who go for the love and the peace. And why I wanted to include that quote in our presentation was we see the Sun here, this inspiration to change the world, to bring harmony, it's in Libra, to bring peace, is right there being shamed by Mars, the warrior, who's got these, frustration and action-taking kind of energy, and has, in his chart, in the way that he dealt with it as a young person, he would end up being violent. And imagine how that would feel when inside yourself you know you have this gift to inspire others to peace, and yet as a young person, you experience yourself hitting other people, including women. That shame that this person must have felt about having such a high calling and having such a violent streak or a violent experience of herself, I think is a great description of their inner shame. And it makes me think of one of his most famous songs, Imagine, that this call to peace, that he did obviously achieve in his life, and this is what happens. We work with our Avashtas over time and we learn how to deal with them. He contributes this song that inspires the world around peace, and it's a very peaceful song. It's not a call to arms or a rallying kind of peace chant or cry. It's pointing out that we already have everything that we need for peace right here. So I thought that was a great way that the sun managed to work around the Mars and share this message of peace in a way that Mars also found acceptable. Let's look now at what it feels like when the moon is shamed. We are ashamed of having feelings, moods, and needs and not being as great as others. You can be ashamed for just even having feelings and you want to keep it hidden inside. And this requires an enormous amount of energy to prevent oneself from having feelings, and it cripples the ability of the moon to be adaptable. Let's see if we can examine a person's life as a way of fixing this type of shame in our minds. I have here Katy Perry's chart, and you can see there's an awful lot going on in Katy Perry's chart. But right there in Scorpio, which is her actual ascendant, we have the Sun, which is a malefic, we have Saturn, which is a pure malefic, and we have Katy node. So we know that the Moon and Mercury are being ashamed here. We're going to focus on the Moon being shamed and share some quotes from Katy Perry, who felt ashamed about taking medication for depression. Okay, so fantastic example for us to look at, that life gets hard and you hold on to this pain, and at the beginning she felt that she could use that pain to help her create songs, and that instead of dealing with her feelings of shame and the pain that was going on there, she would just pump out another number one as a way of kind of saying, you think I'm depressed? Well, I'm on top of the world. And I think that's a great example as well, because it's using the moon as a character for the masses. So she's able, as a young person, to avoid her feelings by putting out an extremely successful musical hit. But eventually that stops working, exactly as we saw in the dot points, that the energy required to suppress these feelings, it stops you from being able to do anything else. So she ended up being depressed, and she says, I was so ashamed of taking medication. I was like, I'm Katy Perry. I wrote Firework. I'm on medication. This is messed up. So she's preventing herself from getting help about depression, which is her feelings, because she feels like she's not allowed to have feelings. She's not allowed to feel depressed. And I think this is a great way for us to grab a hold of the moon being shamed, is to remember this kind of experience, that someone feels that they should be invincible, they should be inspiring, and yet here they are, vulnerable and having to take medication. Let's look now at Mars. And what does it feel like when Mars is being shamed? It's the shame of not being able to act at the right time, not being able to win, and it leads to frustration and violence. Here we have John Lennon's chart again, because we know that this Avashta that he's experiencing in Libra goes both ways. Mars was shaming the Sun in the first example, but here we can see that the Sun is also shaming Mars. And this reminded me of the Ballad of John and Yoko because in this song he shares about how hard it was for him, from his perspective, for him to get married to Yoko. And why was that? Because he makes this spontaneous decision to get married. I believe that Paul and Linda just got married, something like that, and he decides on the same day or the same week that he should marry Yoko. They're driving to Southampton. He gets this idea, I want to get married on a boat or something off the coast. So just like Mars, it's impulsive, it wants to take action, and it's come up with this big vision, because don't forget it's actually being agitated by the Sun as well. So it's going to have these big, grandiose, amazing ideas. But the authorities are not going to allow this marriage because it's so spontaneous. The paperwork, all of the things that the Sun, the government, the administration needs, they're just not available. And so Mars is being shamed, feels shamed. And the lyric says, the man in the Mac said, you've got to go back. You didn't even give us a chance. And so it feels very unfair to Mars. Also doesn't like this experience, this unfair experience. And this song is full of pace. It's called a ballad, but it actually gives you the sense that they're being chased around by these paparazzi and by not being allowed to do what they want to do all over Europe, as the Sun, the governments and the administration shame Mars's impulse to get married. And another line from the song, Christ, it ain't easy. They're going to crucify me. And I think this is a great example of Mars, being crucified, the Sun, all that sacrifice kind of energy, how personally he feels that, and remembering that Mars is the ascendant lord in this chart, so that's why it feels so personal. And I think this is a great contrast to look at his song Watching the Wheels, which was written right towards the end of his life when he'd become a home husband, having been an absolute machine of energy through the 60s and early 70s, transforming the music of the time, transforming himself and the band, touring, performing, recording. And then he makes this decision to step back, and he talks about in an article really struggling with that, like, who am I if I'm not working and not pumping out material? And there's that shame there for Mars of, what is my role if I'm not active? Then there's this song, Watching the Wheels, and you hear this peace that's in his experience. I'm just here watching the wheels go round and round as he, makes bread and looks after his young son. So again, another example of how people work with their Avashtas over time. Mercury, this planet of making things easy. The shame of not being able to keep it all together. The shame of needing to ask for help. Mercury is such the manager that it always wants to be competent. Shame of feeling unacceptable to one's friends. The shame of having to be right, because of course Mercury wants to be objective and explore facts and data and truth. It doesn't want to be on some mission where it's trying to prove a fact. So for this chart, we're going to have a look at pink. And just like some other charts that we've got today, there's a lot going on, but I'm looking there in Virgo. And you can see that we have the Sun and Saturn, so they're both pure malefics. They're with a node, Rahu, and we have other planets there as well. We've got Mercury and Venus. So for this example, I just wanted to pull on the experience of Mercury being shamed and draw on some quotes that Pink has about her life. She mentions that she's an outcast, and I think that's a great term for Mercury when it's shamed. And we talked about shame is going to make us want to withdraw from our connections and friends, from our community, from belonging. So no wonder she felt that she was an outcast. And then she has this description of how she used to fight with her husband, that they would get into these big fights, and that actually underneath all of that is usually that you feel vulnerable, that you feel powerless, that you feel out of control, that you feel scared. But really all you want is for the person to rub your tummy. You know, you want that softness, and you want that your vulnerability is taken care of in a good way. But you feel ashamed that you are even asking for that, because when your Mercury is shamed, you want to be in control. And what does she say there? You feel that you're out of control. So this was a great quote about the experience of Mercury being shamed, which is this vulnerability of not making things easy, of actually becoming an obstruction. Terrible feeling for a Mercury, and can lead to them, you know, being violent or kind of pushing, hitting out. Then we've got another quote from her. I get embarrassed sometimes. I'm an oversharer. So another example of Mercury here causing shame by sharing too much. And then here we've got someone saying that she might punch you in the face, but apart from that, she's fairly harmless. And I think this is that thing of Mercury is extremely harmless, but when it's afraid of feeling vulnerable, when it's ashamed, when it's risking being an outcast, being unacceptable to its friends, when it's risking needing help, it might actually push out and use the kashta from those other planets. And then she reflects on her childhood, and I thought this also picked up on some of those Mercury themes. So when marriages become hateful, it's pretty hard for the children, especially when they say hateful things, and anything you do can trigger that. I think this speaks to Mercury wanting to manage. It wants things to be predictable. It can deal with any situation as long as it knows the cause and effect, what triggers one thing, so that it can put everything in the order and manage the situation. And the shame of not being able to manage that this violence, this unpleasant situation is occurring, and it doesn't matter what I do, I'm out of control. I have no way to make this easy. I have no way to stop this from being obstructive. Okay, let's have a look at Jupiter. Jupiter is our sense of hope, and it gives, when it's shamed, we feel shame for not being good or preventing oneself from doing good. Or maybe worse, the shame of appearing good but not being good. And the person can feel pain in expressing their heartfelt beliefs. The shame of not having something meaningful or not having done something meaningful in one's life. And for this example, I picked Yoko Ono to go with our matching John Lennon set. And here we have many things going on, actually, but I'm going to pick on one. There's kind of two ashamed Avashtas happening here. I want to pick on the one that's happening there in Virgo, in the 12th house of this chart, which is that we have Mars, a pure malefic, with K2, a node, and Jupiter is also there. And what do we notice about Yoko Ono's life? That she was already a successful peace activist and an artist in her own right. But because of the circumstances of marrying this famous person, instead of becoming known for her work around peace, which is what she was doing, she becomes the woman who broke up the Beatles, or the most famous pop widow of all time, or something like that. So imagine the shame of having this goodness that you want to bring to life, and instead, or you want to bring to the planet, you want to bring to the world, and instead you're known for your role as a wife. So that inner futility of not being able to do the good that one knows is inside the self. Venus, we were saying perhaps this is an easier one to grab a hold of because it's the shame of desires and passions. Just having desires can feel shameful. the shame of believing one doesn't deserve fulfillment. And for this example, I've picked Ian Fleming, who wrote the James Bond 007 series. And we're looking at shamed Avashta in the 6th house of Cancer. We've got Mars, a pure malefic, with Rahu, a node, and Venus, the planet that we're interested in exploring. This person was a serial womanizer, chain smoked, and drank heavily. So I think we've got some indulgences on the Venus side there. And he and his wife regularly beat each other, and this is documented in their letters to each other. So this was something that, you know, everybody has their own way of working things out in the bedroom. When asked about his similarities to the James Bond character, he replied, "I certainly haven't got James Bond's very lively appetites. However, Fleming's sexual appetite was every bit as voracious as 007's. No one I have ever known had sex on the brain as much as Ian," said a girlfriend, Lady Mary Packham. And so this is a great quote because it shows that when pushed in public, the facade self is saying, you know, that this is not who I am. It's just a novel that I wrote. This is a character. But actually the people that know the truth of his inner life are saying, you know, actually that's a complete lie. This is who he was and how he was. While he was a young man at university, he contracted a sexual disease from a prostitute, and his mother forced him to resign from the army. So this very shameful experience occurred, and publicly. Outside the bedroom, he preferred the company of men whom he described as the only real human beings. Women were there to be chased, bedded, and then discarded. So again, this relationship that he's having with Venus, with women in his chart, with desires, with passions, is very mixed up kind of experience. And his attitude to the opposite sex was built on feelings of disgust and inadequacy at the consequences of catching this sexually transmitted disease. So this is a great example of the person feeling shame about their Venus and not being able to have an open and flowing relationship with life. He had to have this separate hidden life and then his public life. Finally, let's have a look at Saturn, which is going to give shame around flaws. The shame of not meeting standards, of not being good enough, the shame of being natural. What a gift Saturn brings to the world in being authentic and natural. And yet, if we have the right conditions, the person is going to feel shame about their natural state. For this example, I've got Mariah Carey, and we're looking here at Aries, and the 12th house, we've got Sun and Saturn, so both of those are pure malefics, with Rahu, a node, and with Venus. So we've got lots going on, but let's look at this for Sun shaming Saturn. And we have here that the singer was diagnosed with bipolar in 2001. Until recently, she says, I lived in denial and isolation and in constant fear someone would expose me. So a great example of some Saturn shaming there, a flaw that one is aware of, that is trying to keep hidden, but it causes the person fear and isolation. I would feel so lonely and sad, and even guilty that I wasn't doing what I needed to be doing for my career. So great Saturn words there, lonely and sad. And then this guilty about not doing what I should for my career is a great expression to describe the sun there, you know, wanting this greatness, wanting this beaming energy of the sun, bold and front and center, and not being able to do that because of Saturn and feeling ashamed about that. And then another great Saturn word, it was too heavy a burden to carry and I simply couldn't do that anymore. So here we see this person with a secret flaw and how they held on to this for nearly like a decade, hoping not to be found out, feeling that shame inside of this broken part of themselves, and not being treated, not feeling well, all because they're so ashamed. And now let's have a look at these shamed Avashtas are inner psychological experiences, but they're also playing out with the characters that they represent. And for this example, I want to look at Jupiter as a character for husband and Venus as a character for wife. And we're going to go back to Yoko Ono because she's got so much to give here. We're talking about Virgo. We've got Jupiter being shamed by Mars. So in order to have that dynamic, we know that the person is going to feel like they're doing the right thing. That's Mars, right? It's always into right and wrong. It's always trying to do the right thing. But something about the husband is going to bring shame for this person. That's what we're seeing with this. If we didn't know it was Yoko Ono, that's the dynamic that we're seeing, that the person's going to feel like they're doing the right thing, and yet something about their husband is going to bring shame regardless. So did you know about Yoko Ono that she was married 3 times? And we can imagine that is the case because K2 is separative. It's going to create this separation from the husband, from Jupiter. And she lost custody of one of her children, and that Jupiter is also a character for children, and there's K2 creating separation. So here, if we look at just the John Lennon bit of this story, she's pursued by a married man. So actually she's single, she's doing the right thing, she's available, and yet this other person who's not available, he's the one not doing the right thing, and yet the way the public sees it, the way it's remembered, causes shame to her. Then after getting through that, and they're actually legally married, she becomes famous for breaking up the Beatles, and she's not able to be a blushing bride or enjoy the happiness of being married because this image is attached to her, this shameful image that she broke up the Beatles, which apparently is not true at all anyway, but at the time was universally seen to be true. Then imagine they managed to survive this situation. They moved to New York. Theoretically, they're safe and dry, right? They've got their own home in their apartment in New York, but actually inside of herself, apparently, she begins to feel stifled, that all this attention from John, she wants a bit more space and freedom in the relationship, and he's being too clingy or too needy, and she orchestrates an affair with their personal assistant. He moves out of the house, he moves to the other side of the country, he describes it as his lost weekend. And now, and this is what's so powerful about the Lajjitaadi Avashtas in the chart, is that they are creating this dynamic to experience the karma. So we end up doing things that you can't even imagine. So here is this woman's now created a situation where she gets to be the victim of a cheating spouse. But apparently the whole time she was ringing every day, she was telling the assistant how to handle the press and how things should be spun to tell this story. So very much creating this experience in her own life. And then she loses her husband to a violent death. So I think this really portrays that these Avashtas are very powerful, and they will manifest situations in someone's life that will create this shame. So here's this independent feminist woman, and instead of being known for her own contribution, she becomes famous first as a band wrecker, of like the biggest band at the time, and then being somebody's widow. Her own work, her own contribution, her own voice, it's all sidelined. And Mars there representing society's view of right and wrong. So she ends up getting all of this shame and notoriety just from being somebody's husband, that Jupiter right there. Even her husband doesn't acknowledge her. With songwriting credits, Lennon later stated he regrets about feeling guilty enough to give McCartney credit as co-writer on his first independent single instead of giving it to Yoko, who actually wrote it with him. So here is the husband also causing shame onto the wife. This cannot be recognized for her goodness. What about the other way around? What about when Venus represents a wife in someone's chart? For this chart, I've chosen Garth Brooks. Here's a person doing the right thing. That's the Mars element. And the person has feelings of love, a wife, a mistress that brings them into conflict with the right thing. If we look at his chart, we've got an awful lot happening. You can see these incredibly creative artists, you know, we've got a lot going on. In this case, I'm looking at Aquarius, and I have got Venus there with K2. I've also got Venus, K2 being shamed by the Sun is there, Mars is there, and Saturn is there. So I've got everything that I need to create this shamed Avashta. So what happens in this person's life? He gets married in 1986. He's married his college sweetheart, right? So he's explained, being married, it's got to be right. This is who you went to college with, and you were married in front of God and your family and everything. So fantastic statement of the Martian version of what life is about. And what happens? A year later, he's introduced to a young woman by a friend. When the woman leaves, the friend asks, "What did you think?" And Garth Brooks says, "Well, it's strange because I felt that feeling like when you met your wife. But I've already been married. I'm already married. I'm only a year into my marriage." So here's a perfect example of Venus being shamed, that Venus, this natural compass for us, it's a sense of taste inside of ourselves that tells us what's going to lead us to higher fulfillment. He stands next to this woman, and off goes his Venus and tells him for sure this is the person he should be married to. And yet he's actually married to someone else. And because of what he stated in that quote above, this is his whole identity is wrapped up in doing the right thing and being the right person. So he doesn't make a move because he's committed to his vows, but he doesn't exactly paint this marriage, his original marriage, in a good light, saying, so you keep on hacking and you work and you work and you work, and then it comes the time when you're looking at the rest of your life and going, how do you want to live it? So you can see that, you know, Mars is making him do the hard work. He's got lots of planets, you know, we're just picking on Mars here, but he's making him do the hard work. So it's the Venus here. It's not talking about the love or the softness, the ease and the desires. This is all about the work. And then what happens? Luckily, in this case, over time with Garth Brooks, it resolves itself, and both his original marriage dissolves and the girl that he first met was also married. Her marriage dissolves and they end up together. They're currently together. And so what are the potential gifts here of the shamed Avashta? If we look at Garth Brooks, you know, it is teaching that love has nothing to do with right and wrong. It's separating those two things from each other. And it's also really affirming the value of Venus as our guide for our higher fulfillment, even when that puts us in conflict with right and wrong. So much to learn, and this person luckily lived long enough to have that experience. And if we reflect on another of the couple of examples we spoke about with Yoko Ono, this Jupiter K2 Mars, I feel like that combination is teaching someone that true contentment is beyond being wronged. That even though Yoko Ono has every right to feel like she was wrongly accused of being a band wrecker, and it was wrong. It's wrong that she's remembered as a famous widow rather than for her own contributions. Those things are clearly wrong. But actually, true contentment, what Jupiter is all about, it has nothing to do with right and wrong. And this Avashta focuses a person on really finding the true meaning of Jupiter. And for John Lennon, we could say that this tough combination, Sun, Rahu, Mars, Mars, Rahu, Sun, has given the person the opportunity to choose love and peace, even like when they have been violent. It's shown them that love and peace is the answer to that violence through their own somatic experience of resolving this Avashta. They've been able to contribute more to peace than many people. Final thoughts before we get to the benefits of these Avashtas is these. Remember that I'm trying to share with you, we can, as astrologers and as students of astrology, we can help understand hidden feelings, because astrology is showing us these distinct, nuanced versions of shame. What shame looks like when Mars feels futile, what shame looks like when Saturn feels flawed, what shame looks like when Mercury feels that it's become an obstruction rather than a helper. And I think that's so powerful in helping people unpack their feelings. But astrology is even more nuanced than that. And remember that each of these Avashtas looks different when it's with Rahu, when it's made with Ketu, or when it's made by the fifth house. So there's even more subtlety in these different versions of shame. All of those are in that Lajjitaadi periodic table that was in video 2. I think another point that's really important to remember is that the shamed Avashta is going to create this dynamic in a person's life. Unbelievably. It is like Garth Brooks standing next to the woman that he knows he's supposed to marry, you know. Like Yoko Ono orchestrating an affair, which is the classic Mars, Ketu, Jupiter experience. She actually created that experience because it's in her chart. And this is how astrology helps us become objective. It shows the chart as separate to the person's self, and they can see why they are making some of these decisions in their life. And that space gives the opportunity to react differently and create a new life. And knowing that this is in your chart can give you comfort and empowerment around this shouldn't have happened. This goes back to the shame. You may not have done anything to create shame, but someone may have done something shameful to you. So knowing that it's in your chart takes away whether you did it or he did it or she did it or they did it to you. It's just there in the chart, and let's work with it. And so in conclusion, explaining shamed Avashta for a client can help bring light into an area of darkness. It can relieve the guilt of it shouldn't have happened. It can help the person untangle the complexity of a hidden experience. And it can bring context and language to this somatic, triggered kind of response. And that buys them time and space to respond differently. It can promote the person to achieve something great. And you look at all the people that we examined today and those amazing contributions they've made. Like Pink has really spoken to people who feel like they're outcasts. She's created a community of outcasts. She's empowered them. And look at John Lennon, you know, look at these amazing people. And when healed, the shamed Avashta creates an empathy for humanity that is authentic and profound, and that can move humanity forward closer to that healed space, closer to the sense of flow and goodness in someone's life. So people who heal their shamed Avashta are some of the most powerful contributors to health in this world. So it's a very strong constellation to have in the chart, but I think it has the potential to bring enormous healing as well. Thank you very much. I look forward to your comments and feedback. I hope that you feel more confident in identifying what different shames look like for different clients. And if this is in your chart, I hope you feel empowered to see the dynamics that are making certain patterns play out in life, and that empowerment gives you what you need to change your reactions and feel empathy for yourself and become one of these great contributors and healers on the planet. Thank you, and see you on my YouTube channel next time.
Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed that video. Now you've seen all about the shamed Lajjitaadi Avashta, and I'm hoping you're inspired to use it powerfully with your clients or in your own chart. So what is it that you can do? I want to invite you to come over here to my website, fionamarques.com. Looks like fionamarques.com. In Portuguese, we tend to push all those sounds together. And when you are here on this site, you can have a look at all the services that I offer. And if you click here on astrology, you can book some time with me. It sets up in your time zone so that I arrive at the right time, and so do you. Also, you can come along and maybe register for one of my hubs. I would love to start a coaching circle around the Ashamed Avashta. So if you have one, or you have a client who really wants to learn how to work with it, get them to register their interest here so that I can get that up and running. And then, of course, you can come to my blog and have a look at my style of reading and thinking about astrology. You can see at the top all of these categories, and if you click on one of these, this one is set up at the moment for all of my papers about Prince Harry, my final paper for the 4-year astrology program. Before that, the paper before that was on Meghan Markle. So her whole 12 houses are here, around about 800 to 1,000 words about each house. If you want to see how to put together the Lajjitaadi Avashtas, the strength of the planet through Shadbala, the Vargas, the yoga score, and all of those planetary aspects and Rashi aspects, and the houses and the prosperity, annihilation. Each of these different chapters goes through that in detail. So have a look on the blog. And finally, also another thing to have a look, if you want to understand my style, is to come and check out these videos being a fly on the wall in an astrology session. So that should give you a real sense of what my work is like. And the final thing that I want to invite you to do is come along to my YouTube channel and subscribe and check out the videos that we have here, examining all different aspects of my experience with applying the teachings from Asheville Vedic Astrology apprenticeship course. I'm really looking forward to hearing your comments and building that relationship with you over time as we both get to understand astrology more and more. Thanks for supporting all of us apprentices through the course, and look forward to working with you in the future. Bye for now.